the arrest and the mistake. The docking bay of Tarsus Prime Orbital Command was unusually silent. Normally, the air would hum with the sounds of welding torches, hydraulic lifts, and the steady chatter of engineers coordinating repairs on incoming starships. But today, there were no humans in sight. Commander Darius Holt stepped onto the platform, his boots clanking against the metal floor. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere, a tension thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. The Zorak engineers, a reptilian species with a rigid sense of hierarchy, moved stiffly, their compound eyes flicking toward him before snapping away. Something was very wrong. Holt marched straight into Control Chamber 6, where a holographic projection of Prefect Zirak loomed over a command console. The Zorak administrator's yellow-green scales reflected the sterile station light, his narrow face twisted in what passed for self-satisfaction. "Ah, Commander Holt," Zirak said smoothly, his mandibles twitching. "I assume you're here about the detainment of your mechanics." Holt stopped in front of the console, crossing his arms. "That's one way to put it. I call it kidnapping." Zirak's expression didn't change, but the other Zorak in the room tensed. "Your people were found guilty of unauthorized modifications on Galactic Confederation property." "Unauthorized?" Holt's voice was dangerously calm. "They were fixing your ships. Your own pilots were sending in repair requests faster than your engineers could handle. My team stepped in to keep your fleet operational." Zirak clicked his mandibles. "Your fixes were undocumented, unapproved, and completely reckless." He turned to one of his aides, who pulled up a holographic display showing a breakdown of human-made modifications. "In several instances, your people bypassed safety protocols, altered coolant flows, and modified plasma venting systems. This is not acceptable." Holt exhaled slowly. "You mean the coolant systems that weren't working properly? Or the plasma vents that would have caused a full core breach if we hadn't adjusted them?" He took a step forward. "Your engineers follow instructions exactly as written, even when they're outdated or flawed. My mechanics actually think." Zirak's frills flared in irritation. "Thinking is not their job. Following procedure is." Holt clenched his jaw. "And where exactly are my people now?" Zirak's aide pressed a button, and a new display flickered to life, a live feed from a prison cell block deep beneath the surface of Tarsus Prime. A dozen humans sat on metal benches, some playing cards, others engaged in quiet conversation. If they were worried, they weren't showing it. One of them, Chief Engineer Lisa Carter, leaned against the wall with a bored expression. She noticed the camera and gave it a mocking salute. Holt's eyes narrowed. "Release them. Now." Zirak chittered in what might have been amusement. "Their trial is in 3 cycles. If found guilty, they will be banned from ever working on Confederation vessels again." Holt's fists tightened. They didn't have 3 cycles. Hell, they didn't have 3 hours. "Prefect," Holt said, keeping his voice controlled, "I suggest you reconsider. Your ships depend on my people. Without them, I doubt you'll keep half your fleet running." Zirak's slitted eyes gleamed with cold certainty. "We have our own engineers. We will adapt." Holt held his gaze for a long moment. Then he smirked. "You sure about that?" Zirak's confidence wavered for just a second. Holt turned sharply and walked out. The door sealed behind him with a hiss. 30 minutes later, everything started breaking down. The first alert came from docking Sector 12, a Zorak cargo freighter locked in place, unable to disengage from its moorings. The technicians, following standard procedures, were unable to override the fault. Then came the critical systems failures. A Confederation battleship, the Varan's Pride, powered down unexpectedly mid-flight, drifting off course toward a planetary defense satellite. An entire sector of the station lost gravity stabilization, sending dozens of Zorak engineers floating helplessly through their own control rooms. Emergency klaxons wailed across Tarsus Prime. Holt watched from the observation deck, arms crossed, as the chaos unfolded below. He activated his communicator. "Carter. How's prison?" Carter's voice crackled over the line. Not bad. They gave us protein paste for lunch. Real gourmet treatment. You watching the news? Oh yeah, she said, amused. Didn't take long, did it? Nope. Holt smirked. A Tarsian security officer burst into the room, his scales flushed with stress. Commander Holt. Prefect Zirak demands your presence, immediately. Holt feigned surprise. Oh? What's the problem? The officer's frills twitched. We require assistance with multiple system failures. Holt glanced at the chaos outside. Huh. That's weird. I thought you guys didn't need us. The officer hesitated. The prefect is willing to negotiate. Holt let the silence stretch before he finally sighed. Fine. But first, you're going to release my people. The officer hesitated. Holt took a step forward, lowering his voice. If you want your fleet intact, you need us back. Right now. The officer swallowed and nodded. I'll notify the prefect. Holt smiled. Good choice. 15 minutes later, Carter and the rest of the mechanics were back on the station, standing in front of a furious Zirak. The Zorak leader's mandibles twitched violently. I do not appreciate being forced into this situation. Carter smirked. Maybe you should have thought about that before you threw us in a cell. Zirak ignored her, looking straight at Holt. Fix it. Now. Holt didn't move. Not until we discuss terms. Zirak let out a low hiss. Terms? Holt's expression hardened. Better contracts. More control over repair work. And from now on, no one touches my team without cause. Zirak glared at him. You are in no position to make demands. Holt gestured toward the station outside, where Zorak engineers still struggled to contain the cascading failures. Looks like I am. Zirak's frills flared. But after a long, bitter pause, he gave a sharp nod. Fine. Holt turned to Carter. Get to work. She grinned. About damn time. As the humans spread out, stations rebooted, gravity stabilized, and ships were pulled back from disaster. Holt stood over Zirak, arms crossed. Next time, just ask for help. Zirak said nothing. But the lesson had been learned. The breaking point. The Zorak fleet limped through space, battered but operational, thanks to the human mechanics they had so arrogantly dismissed. Commander Darius Holt stood in the primary control room of Tarsus Prime, arms crossed as he watched the repair log scroll across a holoscreen. His mechanics had restored over 40 key systems in under 2 hours. Without them, the station would have been an orbital tomb. Prefect Zirak stood on the other side of the room, seething in silence. His mandibles twitched as he watched his own engineers struggle to process the human-designed modifications. Your people make unconventional adjustments, Zirak admitted stiffly. Holt smirked. That's why they work. The prefect didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention back to the station-wide diagnostics, clearly searching for something to criticize. But the numbers didn't lie. Efficiency had increased by 20% since the humans had taken over repairs. Zirak's aide, a junior officer named Rurnak, leaned in and whispered something. The prefect's frills flattened, his irritation deepening. What is it? Holt asked, knowing full well it was bad news. Zirak's glare was pure acid. Another ship failure. Holt raised an eyebrow. One of ours? No. Zirak's voice was tight with frustration. One of ours. The Vorax Judgment, a heavy cruiser, just suffered a complete systems blackout. Holt sighed. And let me guess, your engineers are struggling to fix it. Silence. Holt turned to his communicator. Carter, we've got another one for you. Lisa Carter's voice crackled through the speakers. On it. Zirak watched as Holt dispatched his team without hesitation. The prefect hated this, hated how quickly humans adapted, how effortlessly they took charge of problems his own people couldn't solve. Holt noticed the look. Something wrong, Prefect? Zirak's mandibles clicked together. Your people have unusual methods. They do not document their changes. Holt's smirk didn't fade. We fix what needs fixing. And unlike your engineers, we don't waste time with bureaucracy. Zirak let out a low hiss, but he didn't argue. Aboard the Vorak's judgment, Carter found the real problem. Looks like your power relays are wired like a goddamn death trap, she muttered, examining the circuitry. The Zorak engineers had followed regulations to the letter, right into a catastrophic feedback loop. A young Zorak technician, his scales still a dull green of inexperience, stood nearby. We followed standard Confederation procedures. Carter scoffed. Yeah, and that's why your ship nearly turned into a very expensive paperweight. She pulled out a manual override tool, bypassing the system entirely. Within seconds, the ship's power grid rebooted, lights flickering back on. The technician's eyes widened. That shouldn't have worked. Carter smirked. And yet, here we are. The cruiser's captain, Zalcor, appeared on screen, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. That was efficient. Carter wiped her hands on a rag. Try necessary. Zalcor hesitated. Your methods are reckless. She shrugged. So is dying in the void because your system can't handle real-world conditions. The Zorak captain had no argument for that. Back on Tarsus Prime, Holt and Zirak were at an impasse. Zirak's pride was bleeding out. The humans had proven themselves essential, and every passing minute made that fact harder to deny. We will need further analysis, Zirak finally said, as if the words physically pained him. Holt chuckled. You mean you need us? Zirak refused to say it outright. Instead, he changed the subject. The Confederation will not approve of this. Holt leaned forward. Then maybe it's time the Confederation stopped pretending their way is the only way. The prefect's frills twitched, but he said nothing. In the silence, a new alarm blared through the control room. Zirak's aide froze. Emergency distress signal, from the outer perimeter. Holt turned sharply. What kind of emergency? Rurnak checked the data. His expression darkened. Hostile fleet incoming. The reckoning. The red emergency lights pulsed in the control room, casting shadows across the tense faces of officers and technicians. Tarsus Prime had been on high alert before, but never like this. Commander Darius Holt studied the incoming sensor data. The enemy fleet was approaching fast, too fast for comfort. At least a dozen warships, bristling with firepower. Prefect Zirak stood rigid, his mandibles clicking in agitation. We are not prepared for a full-scale assault. No kidding, Holt muttered. He turned to his comms officer. Status on defensive systems? A junior officer, a human, responded swiftly. Shields at 80%, orbital defense platforms still running on backup power. We're not at full strength. Zirak's eyes flicked to Holt. How soon until full combat readiness? Holt didn't hesitate. With our guys? Give us 20 minutes. The prefect stiffened. Unacceptable. Holt rounded on him. Then maybe you should have let us finish the dam repairs before locking up my mechanics. Zirak's frills flattened, but before he could argue, another alarm blared. Enemy ships had entered weapons range. A deep voice crackled over the comms. Tarsus Prime, this is High Warlord Jurvak of the Krell Dominion. Surrender your station or be annihilated. The room fell silent. Zirak exhaled sharply. The Krell do not bluff. Holt's jaw tightened. Neither do humans. The prefect turned to his tactical officers. Deploy the fleet. All warships to defensive positions. Too slow, Holt cut in. If we scramble now, we'll be picked apart before we form a defensive line. Zirak's mandibles flared in frustration. Then what do you suggest? Holt didn't miss a beat. We hit first. Hit fast. The prefect hesitated. The Zorak were not a preemptive species, They relied on rigid formations, controlled engagements. But they didn't have that luxury. Minutes later, the battle begins. The station's autocannons fired first, sending streaks of plasma into the void. The Krell ship's evasive maneuvers were fast, but not fast enough. The lead cruiser took a direct hit to its shielding, causing a ripple of energy to shimmer across its hull. Then the Krell returned fire. Tarsus Prime shook as the first barrage struck home. Holt braced against the nearest console. "Report." A technician shouted, "Hull breach in Sector 7. Shields at 55%. Zirak hissed, eyes locked on the battle display. "Your brilliant plan is getting us killed." Holt didn't look up. Not yet. The human mechanics had been working non-stop to get the Zorak ships combat ready. Now, it was time to see if it paid off. Holt's earpiece crackled. "Commander, we've rerouted power to the forward cannons. They'll fire at double output, but we'll drain reserves in 5 minutes." "Then let's make those 5 minutes count," Holt said. He turned to Zirak. "Order your fleet to concentrate fire on their left flank. Their formation's weakest there." Zirak hesitated, but his survival instincts won out. He relayed the order. The Zorak ships shifted, focusing their fire. The Krell's leftmost vessels buckled, shields faltering under the relentless assault. Holt grinned. "That's more like it." But the Krell weren't done. A new energy signature appeared on the scanners. Holt's stomach dropped. "That's a dreadnought." Zirak's scales darkened. "Impossible. The Krell wouldn't waste a dreadnought on." A shockwave hit the station, cutting him off. The Krell had just fired a Capital-class disruptor cannon. Tarsus Prime reeled, lights flickering as entire power grids overloaded. The command room filled with warning sirens. Holt barely stayed upright. "Damage report." "Main powers fried. Shielding at 20%. Zirak turned to Holt, eyes burning with accusation. "Your plan has doomed us." Holt ignored him. His mind was already racing. They needed a new angle, fast. "Can we move?" he asked. Zirak's aide checked the controls. "Negative. Station thrusters offline." Holt exhaled through clenched teeth. "Then we need to make that dreadnought move." His mind snapped to a risky, insane idea. "Get me Carter." A few seconds later, Lisa Carter's voice came through. "What's the situation?" "Bad," Holt admitted. "I need you to disable that dreadnought." Silence. Then, "Are you out of your damn mind?" Holt smirked. "You say that like it's new." Carter exhaled. "What's the plan?" "The gamble." Carter and a team of human mechanics launched in a modified Zorak transport. The Krell dreadnought was a fortress, but every fortress had weaknesses. Holt watched the display, heart pounding. "Come on, Carter." Zirak stood beside him, arms crossed. "If they fail, we are finished." Holt nodded. "If they succeed, we win." On screen, Carter's ship weaved through the chaos, dodging debris and weapons fire. The dreadnought's shields were focused forward, where the main fleet was engaging. That left an opening. Approaching target, Carter's voice crackled. Deploying the package. Her team launched drones, small enough to avoid detection. They clamped onto the dreadnought's hull, burrowing into its systems. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, "We're in. Overriding engine controls now." The dreadnought lurched violently. On the battle display, the massive ship's thrusters ignited in reverse, forcing it back toward the Krell fleet. Holt grinned. "Beautiful." Carter laughed. "Told you, never underestimate human ingenuity." The Krell realized too late. Their own dreadnought, now out of control, collided with their leading warships. The impact shattered their formation. Tarsus Prime's surviving defenses seized the opportunity. Focused fire ripped through the disoriented enemy fleet. Within minutes, the Krell retreated. Aftermath. The command center erupted in cheers. Holt leaned back against the console, exhaling. Zirak, still stunned, shook his head. I do not understand how your kind survives. Holt chuckled. We don't just survive, Prefect. We win. The Prefect looked around at his officers, at the station still standing despite impossible odds. For the first time, he didn't argue. Instead, he extended a hand. Holt grinned and shook it. Let's get to work,